I really think at the end of the day, muscle mass is all about the training, and it's 99% training and it's 1% diet. I mean, people ask me, okay, what diet should I eat if I want to have the absolute highest amount of muscle? And I'm like, okay, well, what diet would you eat if you wanted the largest calluses on your hands, right? It's like you eat whatever you friggin' wanted and you dig ditches for an hour a day, and muscle's the same way. Your body's pretty much going to figure out how to get what it needs to accomplish what you're making it do.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This episode is brought to you by MedX Precision Fitness in Toronto, Canada, a leading-edge fitness facility co-founded by my friend Blair Wilson, who has featured on the podcast numerous times. MedX Precision Fitness are highly respected in the strength training industry, and with the help of a wonderful team, have grown a very popular and successful training facility. They've been featured in the Huffington Post, the Globe and Mail, Toronto Guardian, and many more. They provide complete fitness in as little as 20 minutes per week and use evidence-based, high-effort strength training to give you the most efficient and effective workout you'll ever have. As many of you long-time listeners will know, this is the perfect workout for the busy executive. Aside from Blair's bulging muscles, there are no distractions, so no mirrors, no loud music, and no meatheads walking around everywhere. MedX Precision Fitness uses some of the most sophisticated and high-quality equipment available in the way of the MedX machine line, delivering you the best results possible. As well as personal training, they offer nutrition coaching and bod pod services to optimize your health, muscle gain, and fat loss, and give you instant feedback on your progress. Book a free consultation now by going over to medxpf.com. That's medxpf.com, medxpapafoxtrot.com, and book your free consultation now. Hey guys, I am Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, the podcast that shows you how to get the most out of your high intensity training and start and grow your strength training business. My former guests include the who's who in high intensity training. People like Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Jim Flanagan, strength training entrepreneurs like Luke Carlson and Adam Zickerman, sports scientists like Dr. James Fisher and Dr. James Steele, high-intensity training bodybuilders, case studies, minimalist adventure racers, and everything in between. My guest today is board-certified family medicine physician, diet and metabolism expert, and one of your favorites, Dr. Ted Naiman, who joins me for a part 3. After enormous demand from you guys and who is basically the most popular guest ever on Corporate Warrior, I wanted to get Ted back onto the show. I could talk to Ted for hours, and I constantly stalk him on Twitter because his Twitter infographics are among the best. And I do think he's doing some great work there. So in this conversation, we basically dive into all things training and diet. So we talk about Ted's training journey and his quest to optimize muscle gain. We talk about the potential downsides of fasting if you drink black coffee during your non-eating window, the potential downsides of the carnivore diet. So carnivore diet is huge right now, and very, very interested to see Ted have some new opinions that he's seen in his own patient data that's led him to certainly be a little bit more cautious in terms of promoting the carnivore diet. And we talk about much, much more than that. This is so much fun talking to Ted. I feel really privileged that this is part of what I do and part of my own business. I just get to talk to really awesome people like Ted and ask him all sorts of questions. For the show notes for this podcast and full list of podcasts, please go to corporatewarrior.co/podcast. And now I give you Dr. Ted Naiman. Ted, welcome back to Corporate Warrior.
Wow, thanks for having me yet again. I guess your ratings were getting too high, so you had to bring me back on here.
That's it. I didn't want to, but they did. No. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why I didn't mention this in the when we were chatting offline, but yeah, you're the most popular guest by far.
I totally don't believe that, but okay.
Well, I think, obviously the episodes were really good. I think that's one of the reasons is people are sharing them and you're helping with Twitter and stuff like that. But I think it's also because you're trending right now. I mean, I think a lot of people are Googling your name. Do you think that's probably true?
I don't, but thanks for saying. And I just have to say that I really love your podcast and I just listened to all the episodes. I think you're doing great work. So I think you're trending, Lawrence. I think that's who's trending.
Very good. No, I appreciate it. And I also appreciate the shout out you gave me on Keto Geek. That was very, very lovely. And I appreciate the kind words you said there. So, we're always talking about, we're both pretty lean guys who are always interested in gaining more muscle mass. And, we're always talking about kind of, what you're doing and what I'm doing, I suppose, with regard to trying to optimize gains. And I think we're doing it very differently, I guess, to a lot of other people out there, in terms of diet. If you look at the whole context, so the training and the diet, it's quite different, I guess, to what a lot of other people are doing. So talk to me, how, since we last spoke, how's the war of grams? You said it's a war of grams in terms of gaining a gram of muscle and losing a gram of fat on a daily or weekly basis, which not only is a great way to look at trying to optimize appearance, but yeah, you're big on muscle is the organ of longevity, and really that kind of formula is optimal for health as well.
Right. I mean, well, it's going well. I mean, I feel like I've gotten to the point where I've finally dialed in the diet part. And anytime I want to lean out a little bit, I just up my protein to energy ratio. And so I feel like I've really got that dialed in. In terms of the just gaining lean mass, I think I'm slowing down a little bit. You know what I mean? It's sad, but I think my genetic potential is just minuscule. I mean, you have no idea how small my wrist and ankles are. My wrists and ankles are maybe 6 inches in diameter. You know what I'm saying? I have a bird-like bone structure. I literally, my 11-year-old daughter, I measured her wrist the other day and she's a normal weight and her wrist was just as big as mine. And that's pretty freaking sad. So I basically have the bone structure of a prepubescent girl. And I think I'm going to hit the point where, I'm going to max out my genetic potential. But yeah, I'm still working on it. And, mostly right now, I'm just mad that nobody told me all the stuff I know now when I was younger. You know what I mean? That's what's going on.
Yeah. Okay, so that's awesome. Congratulations on some of the pictures you've been posting. Great lighting, but they're still very good all the same. But no, you look really impressive. So what you mentioned you've been dialing in the diet. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I basically feel that if I focus on literally the ratio of grams of protein to grams of non-protein energy, fat, or carbohydrate that I eat, I can pretty much eat ad lib and dial my fat mass up or down a little bit just by focusing on this protein to energy ratio. And I feel like this is a really great hack for me. And it's certainly been working for a lot of my patients.
Can you just elaborate on the protein to energy ratio formula for those that aren't familiar with that way of looking at diet?
Right. So basically you could look at any food you're eating and sort of graph out the grams of protein in that food versus grams of non-protein energy. For example, an egg would be 7 grams of protein and 6 grams of fat, so it's fairly close to a 1-to-1 food. Or a ribeye steak is 22 grams of protein and 22 grams of fat per serving, so that's a 1-to-1 ratio. You could go leaner and eat ground beef, which is maybe 2 grams of protein, 1 gram of fat. You could go even leaner and eat a very lean piece of fish, which might be 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1. You've got pure protein in the form of whey protein. And then on the bottom end of the spectrum, you've got very low protein and just pure energy. And that would be your refined processed either carbohydrates or fat, so sugar, flour, oil. You've got, pure energy there with no protein. And the reason all this is important is because we have tons of studies now basically proving that humans and a lot of organisms just prioritize the hell out of protein and will continue to eat until they hit their protein requirements. Protein definitely provides the highest satiety. Most primates for sure are prioritizing the hell out of protein and basically dialing carbs and fats up and down until they hit their protein target. So this protein to energy ratio becomes important if you're trying to minimize energy intake. If you're trying to just eat ad lib and not be starving all the time, paying attention to that seems to be a really, really good strategy.
Cool. And when you say, okay, so are you aiming for 1-to-1 or more 2-to-1, 3-to-1 in favor of protein? Like, what are you aiming for typically?
Well, okay, it's interesting. If you look at the estimated hunter-gatherer macronutrient ratios around the world, you're going to find these people eating about 1-to-1 grams of protein to energy. And that seems to be a really good maintenance intake for your average person with the average activity level. And myself personally, I find that's a really good maintenance ratio, basically 1 gram of protein to 1 gram of energy. And that's pretty much steak and eggs, or if you're a vegan, that would be basically lentils, which would be a 1-to-1 food. And I find that's a really great place to hang out. Now, if you're trying to get leaner, you might want to dial that ratio up to a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1. If you are super, super active and burning tons of energy, if you're, let's say you're doing really huge volumes of training, you definitely have to eat a lower ratio because you're burning more energy calories. But for your average person, this seems to be a really cool thing to pay attention to. And I really do kind of hang out into this 1-to-1 grams of protein to grams of non-protein energy, which is basically net carbohydrates. It's carbohydrates minus fiber and fat grams.
Cool. Okay, cool. And I've got it. That makes perfect sense to me. So you said it's basically steak and eggs. Have you, I remember last time we were speaking on kind of Twitter, you were kind of talking about how you're focusing more on leaner proteins. I tried doing that. I started introducing more ground meat into my diet. But I've kind of come back to ribeye because I just feel a little bit better on a little bit more fat in my diet. So, and it just tastes better.
Right.
So are you still doing that quite often? Like, focusing on the leaner meats at all for kind of maximizing protein intake and, reducing fat intake in that sense?
I think I am a little bit on the leaner side than I was a couple years ago. I would say that's a bit of a change that I made. I think I jumped on the low carb, high fat bandwagon. And for a while there, I was like, oh, wow, I can eat all the, fat I want. And then I realized, okay, maybe that's not quite optimal. And I would say I'm a little bit on the leaner side right now. And that's definitely working for me.
And just to add to that, I know that last time we were chatting on Twitter, you were aiming for 180 grams a day in protein. And I guess if you're aiming for that quantity, then it does sometimes make sense to have the ratio skewed more towards protein because obviously with protein, it comes fat. And if you're trying to aim for a lot of protein, you can also consume a lot of energy calories with that, which may not be ideal if you're trying to stay lean whilst gaining muscle mass. Is that still something is that correct? Firstly, is that right, what I just said? And are you still aiming for that kind of 180 grams a day?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. Of course, right. So you if you're paying attention to this protein to energy ratio, then you definitely want to possibly eat leaner protein sources if you're trying to get leaner. And that's exactly 100% correct. And yeah, I'm still aiming for roughly a gram per pound of what I'd like to weigh. I weigh 165 right now, and I'd like to weigh more than that. So I would say most days I eat about 180 grams of protein. But somewhere in there, some days it's, 200. Or even over if I'm really, hungry, and other days it's a little bit lower, but it's somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're like Sean Bakering it, then you might do 200 plus.
Right.
Cool. Okay. So this is interesting. So I did ask for some second opinions on the desired amount of protein quantifying protein intake target based on desired weight. And some people were like, there's no way that's a sensible target based on, not your instance, when I use this example, but say for me, I'm weighing, I weigh between kind of 151 and 155, about 8% body fat. So if I were to then say, well, look, I'm going to set my target at 170 in terms of protein intake, they would, these are, people in particular would say, well, that's ridiculous because that's too, you're already an advanced trainee and you already had your noob gains. So to expect that you would then be able to gain that much muscle naturally, by eating that much more protein is very unrealistic. So curious what your thoughts are on that opinion, and also whether you feel that, like, 'cause if you're weighing 165, you said right now?
Right.
So you've set a target of 180. That seems very high to me. So what's your thoughts around that?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, we have tons of studies that show that if you overfeed people in protein, typically their lean mass will go up a little bit. Usually energy expenditure goes way up, lean mass goes up a little, fat mass typically does not go up. And one of the reasons why I like to err on the higher protein side is because the things that happen to you are all good. Increased energy expenditure, that sounds good. Increased lean mass, that sounds good too. And not gaining fat mass, it's, what's not to love there. The other thing is, I do agree with the research that you're probably not going to drive muscle gain by going up in protein percentage, but you're probably going to benefit from other factors like body composition. So I have a lot of studies now in other animals. If you basically drive protein up to even as high as 50% of energy calories at the expense of carbohydrates, you're really going to see lean mass go up, fat mass go down, insulin go down, leptin go down, triglycerides go down, and pretty much any of the labs you're looking at or body composition factors you're looking at are basically going to improve as you drive protein percent higher. And so far, I haven't really seen a downside to that. So I think there could be some health and body composition benefits, even if you're north of a maximal muscle protein synthesis threshold, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's really awesome to learn, because it shows there's potentially other benefits to that. The other thing to mention is even doing the way eating like we do with the intermittent fasting and a fewer large, mostly kind of carnivorous meals or protein focused meals. It's not that hard to eat a lot of protein, I've found, so long as you're eating in that context. And so as you know, I've been doing an experiment myself, aiming at 165. Per day at least. And, I've seen some pretty good results. I'm using 3-point caliper and scales, and, there's probably a lot of margin for error, but, I'm pretty pleased with the results so far. As a few pounds gained and a couple body fat percentage lost there. So, but I feel like, there could be some error in that. So I'm going to do it for a longer period of time. And I've also started doing a little bit of, rest pause or kind of MyoRep type techniques, which we'll talk about in a minute, because I know you've been playing around with that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just before we do jump into training, I just got some more questions on the diet side. Keen to get your opinion on this. We know that resistance training is, at the end of the day, such a huge stimulus for muscle growth. I mean, if you compare resistance training to protein intake, protein intake pales in comparison in terms of the importance. Is at least my opinion and my understanding. And I've seen a fair amount of bias in the keto world. Funny that, obviously guys who are really peddling the kind of keto agenda, and there is some good stuff there, but there is definitely some cognitive bias there. And they'll claim that bodybuilders will get great gains with very low protein intakes. That they'll reduce their protein intake right down and have no muscle loss. And immediately I'm thinking, well, firstly, they have incredible genetics. And secondly, resistance training is the primary stimulus. So, yeah, I mean, maybe protein intake is not going to affect them very much. So what's your thoughts on that? And how do you reconcile that with like the recommendation of, 1.6 gram per kilogram of body weight?
I really think at the end of the day, muscle mass is all about the training, and it's 99% training and it's 1% diet. I mean, people ask me, okay, what diet should I eat if I want to have the absolute highest amount of muscle? And I'm like, okay, well, what diet would you eat if you wanted the largest calluses on your hands, right? It's like you eat whatever you friggin' wanted, and you dig ditches for an hour a day, and muscle's the same way. Your body's pretty much going to figure out how to get what it needs to accomplish what you're making it do, right? It's the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demand. If you tell your body that you need more muscle just to stay alive, your body's gonna figure that out. And of course, if you eat no protein, you're screwed. But you're really not gonna. I really feel like it's so much about the training that the protein side for me is almost more about fat mass and ad lib energy consumption and body composition and lab work and health. And I just feel like upping the protein to energy is actually going to really do more for you in that arena than building more muscle. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from.
Cool. Well, I might be splitting hairs even further here, as you kind of already answered this in a way, but I often get the argument, but you need some carbohydrate. Carbohydrate's protein sparing. If you don't have carbohydrate, you're too reliant on gluconeogenesis, which, for those that don't know, is where protein is converted into glucose, which is done when, I guess, we don't have a supply of carbohydrate coming into the body typically. And they will argue that, you need that really to optimize gains. And I'm kind of like not buying it. I just don't think it's that important. So curious, what's your thoughts on that?
I really don't think that's crucial at all, because, we've got like the Volek and Finney faster study showing that these keto people eating no carbohydrates have the exact same muscle glycogen 2 hours later as carb loading people. So how could there really possibly be any differences there? Clearly your body is going to make all the glucose it needs out of protein. And so, yeah, carbs spike insulin, carbs are protein sparing, but protein's also protein sparing, and protein spikes insulin. And so, like, what's the difference? There's really, it's a little more work for your body to try to get energy out of protein. But other than it being so much more work that if you're really lean and you try to eat over 50% protein, you're going to get rabbit starvation and basically have insufficient energy. But other than that, I really don't buy the fact that people have to eat a bunch of carbs. On the flip side, I do think that if you're training and you're muscular, you can get away with a ton of carbohydrates, and it's really not going to be a problem because you have lots of headroom for glycogen storage, and so you can eat carbs. I'm not convinced that you have to.
Yeah, I'd agree with that completely. I do want to come on to the subjects of fasting and carnivore, but I also I'm more interested in prioritizing your training first. So what's your current routine at the moment?
Okay, all right. So I'm trying to, you know me, I'm like trying to be as efficient as possible and as simple as possible and as basic as possible. I'm trying to make the bar to entry of all this resistance stuff so low that literally anybody could do it. So I'm trying to use no equipment. I'm just trying to produce maximum tension in my muscles using body weight exercises. And I'm trying to get by with the absolute most efficient exercise possible. Why am I doing that? I don't know. I'm crazy, right? I am really doing it to democratize it for my patients. I'm like, hey, nobody's told you this before, but you actually don't need a bunch of barbells and weights and a gym. You don't need a giant machine to train. You literally can create the exact same amount of tension in every muscle in your body using these basic push and pull and leg chains. And you can probably get, at least 80% of what you'd want to accomplish just using zero equipment and body weight, as long as you're good at maximizing the tension in all your muscles and you know how to do that. And so what I'm trying to do is hit the absolute pinnacle of efficiency. And when you're trying to be as efficient as possible, you pretty much have to do high intensity training, right? Because anytime you do a set and you're not going to absolute the highest level of fatigue you can generate, you're literally leaving money on the table from an efficiency standpoint. So you basically have to go to high intensity training and a high level of fatigue or, failure, basically. The other thing you have to do is rest pause or some sort of way to extend the effective reps you're doing in a set. You know what I'm saying? So I pretty much always do a rest pause technique, basically a myo rep kind of scheme. The other thing is, if you're trying to be absolutely most time efficient as possible, doing multiple sets and waiting between sets is a real time suck. So it's, I think, in my opinion, more efficient to just do one set daily and increase the frequency, like a daily exercise instead of every other day or several times a week, because the time spent resting between sets or going between different exercises is less efficient. So where I've ended out on this search for maximum efficiency is a single set daily, full body with a rest pause technique to absolutely maximize the amount of effective reps I'm getting with each exercise. So I pretty much do a full body every day. That's it looks like a convict conditioning big 6 exercises, right? A pushing exercise like a push-up or a dip or any push-up variation, a pulling exercise of some sort, usually a pull-up, some sort of pressing exercise like a pike push-up or a handstand push-up, some sort of compound leg exercise, typically pistol squats. And then I'll frequently do an anterior chain and posterior chain like a back bends, back levers, Superman, like a back extension exercise, and then some sort of core, usually a leg lift.
You do like a Superman, like I guess that's the same as a prone trunk extension pretty much.
Right.
We do that to failure.
It's
a bitch.
It's a little hard to do. But yes, I try to do that. I literally try to do that to failure.
And the rest pause, is that something that you've been doing for a while, or myo rep, or has that been inspired at all by some of the recent podcasts? I'm just trying to gauge like where that's come into it.
Oh no, I've always done rest pause. I love rest pause, and to be perfectly fair, I do a little bit of a reverse pyramid as well, because I'll frequently start out with more of a one-arm push-up and then downgrade that to a two-arm push-up. You know what I'm saying? Or I'll go from handstand push-ups and get as close to failure as I can, and then downgrade that to a pike push-up, which I can hit a higher level of failure at without like breaking my neck. So I actually have always employed a rest pause and a slight, what you'd almost call a reverse pyramid or a drop set using body weight, going from like a single leg to a double leg just to extend the fatigue and downgrade the exercise a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, it totally does. And I guess reverse pyramid, that's kind of inspired by Martin Berkhan, I'm going to guess, in terms of the protocols.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
I love that because this is really interesting. It's something I've started experimenting with more myself, because the problem with body weight, and this actually is the same with not just body weight, but a lot of different protocols, is the sticking points. When you get really strong, or not when you get really strong, I should say, when you can do a good number of chin-ups, there's a point where you're going to reach failure at the same point in the chin-up every single time you work out. And you can do an isometric and continue to try and contract and then do a very, very slow negative, but you're just going to keep failing there. And a great way to add volume and to deepen that fatigue, whether it makes a big difference or not is kind of up for debate, I suppose, is to do a rest pause or a myorep or one of these advanced techniques that allow you to add more volume in kind of a safe and effective way. And I've always been highly skeptical of these techniques myself, but in this context, I do think it might work quite well, and I'm coming around to that. So I was doing a workout the other day. I did a machine-based workout, and it's very abbreviated. It's got a seated row and then followed by an overhead press. And I did drop sets on both of those. So drop set, for listeners who don't know what that is just where you reduce the weight by ideally the smallest increment you can and go to failure on a second set or a third set. I just do 2 sets because I find for me, and maybe you're like this, Ted, you're very good at training to a very high level of intensity. So you're very efficient with each set. Whereas I think beginners might need more to kind of get there, if you know what I mean. So it makes a lot of sense to me when you talk about going from really advanced exercises to kind of downgrading and just to get that deeper level of fatigue. And so have you seen, I guess, over Twitter, you mentioned to me that you might have seen some difference, like a pound gained in lean mass. I know that's probably hard to measure, but have you seen improvements in doing that stuff?
Strength? I mean, a year ago at this time, I was 5 pounds lighter at the same body fat according to my impedance scale. So I think I'm still making a little bit of gains, but it's definitely slowing down. My bird wrists and ankles are definitely going to be a huge factor. Well, they already are, let's face it.
And you're training daily. You're still trying to train daily.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does not feel like overtraining. I mean, I think it's really, if you're doing single set, so you're not getting, some sort of crazy volume creep. I find that that's not overtraining daily. That's correct.
Cool.
And it kind of makes sense to me. Honestly, when I think about it, let's say I'm going back to my building calluses on your hands example, right? So what would make more sense? Digging a ditch for, half an hour a day without gloves on to build calluses, or spending, all day once a month just tearing up your hands and then not doing anything for the whole rest of the month. Or if you did a thought experiment and took that to the most ridiculous extreme, you spend a solid week digging ditches and then you don't dig anything for a year, you know what I'm saying? Which is going to give you the most functional tissue. I think maybe doing something daily is really good for functional adaptation of functional tissue. It's like if you're trying to get a tan, what would make more sense? Hitting the tanning bed for 10 minutes a day, every day, religiously, or being in the tanning bed for a week and just burning yourself up and then not going back for months. It's like you're trying to do this functional tissue thing and hitting it with a higher frequency but a smaller amount seems to make sense to me.
And I guess the repeated bout effect can certainly help with recovery with this type of thing. But I'm just still so skeptical, Ted. I still think like this is that you're a little bit of a phenom, and I mean, I know you were quite clear before that you didn't think it was superior necessarily to training less frequently, but you just believed it was not it. I'm getting confused now, but you didn't think it was any worse than training less frequently. That's your kind of point. But on your point, right, of being as efficient as possible, why train this frequently? If you want to be as efficient as possible, surely you would want to like decrease your frequency, unless you really feel that the gains are related to the frequency.
I honestly, to be totally honest, I feel pretty strongly that if I just suddenly started doing the same thing every other day instead of every day, I would probably notice nothing at all. So yeah, I think daily is probably
do you just like the pump? That's what it is, isn't it?
I don't know. I feel a little bit better doing it daily. And I just like the concept of doing something every day, kind of like I eat protein every day and I sleep every day and I brush my teeth every day. And, I've gotten to the point where if I don't do this, I just don't feel as good. And maybe I'm like addicted to exercise and slightly OCD and a little bit crazy. But I know inside that if I did this every other day, it probably would make zero difference. And I think that also gives me the freedom to, if I were situationally unable to work that into a day, I could just skip it and it wouldn't be a problem.
Interesting. No, I get that. That's cool. It's interesting hearing that it's more of like a positive habit, like a lifestyle habit, which totally makes sense to me. Cool. Okay. So, I want to talk to you a bit about fasting, lots of concepts around fasting that I'm really find quite confusing and really keen to pick your brains on. You're big on like being very pulsatile with food, right? So you have infrequent big meals, kind of feast and famine type approach to eating. And that's exactly what I do. And it just seems to make sense to me. Now, maybe splitting hairs with this question, but if you decide to have like breakfast and dinner rather than lunch and dinner, a la 16/8 intermittent fasting, is that any worse than the latter? In that you're not having such a big gap from eating? Because I'm just thinking like Art Devaney, he does a kind of typically does a breakfast and a dinner and then training in the middle. So do you think that could be inferior to a 16/8 approach?
I think that could be inferior if you're insulin resistant and overweight and diabetic. And we do have a bunch of alternate day fasting studies that are really interesting in that population that would suggest that the more you shrink your eating window down to like once a day, probably the better it is for the insulin resistant person. I think for your insulin sensitive, healthy person who's paying attention to what they're eating, then when they're eating it might not matter very much. Like for someone who's thin and insulin sensitive and exercising and has no problems whatsoever, you could probably divide their meals up any way you wanted and it wouldn't be a health impact. I do think that for if you just look at hunger and satiety, we have some studies that definitely suggest that the more frequently you eat, the worse it is for hunger and satiety. And there are several studies looking at, for example, 3 meals a day versus 6 meals a day, and looking to see if eating more frequently was improvement for satiety. And it's actually usually always worse. Eating less frequently is better for satiety. And a lot of people can get by with eating less energy if they eat less frequently. That's really the magic behind lean gains. Is some people find it they have higher satiety, lower hunger, and they're able to eat less energy if they're eating less frequently. But if you don't have a problem, if you're in perfect health, you could probably do whatever you wanted with the same calories.
Cool. Thanks for clearing that up for me. So there's a few people that kind of advocate longer fasting periods on occasion. So like, Tim Ferriss is kind of popular now for doing I think he does a 3-day monthly fast and maybe like a 5-day quarterly fast or something like that, where I'll fast completely and just drink water, I think. The idea, I suppose, is that you're triggering autophagy, which for those that don't know is where cells basically, it's like a cell house cleaning process where they will consume like wasted debris and stuff like that in the body. As they're kind of having a break from metabolizing glucose and fat and that kind of thing. Do you feel like this is really necessary for longevity? Maybe it's one of those questions that hasn't been answered yet and may never be answered. But do you think there's any advantage to these kind of longer fasting periods?
I think there probably is, but I haven't seen strong enough evidence for it that I'm not doing it myself. In other words, I haven't seen enough evidence to make me want to go on a week-long fast. I haven't done that. But I do think that, I feel very strongly that humans are pretty much, we're battery powered, right? We have this chemical battery with fat stored in our bodies, and you're designed to just run off of this all the time. Basically, humans produce energy in the form of ATP constantly all the time, but we only refuel every once in a while. And anything that looks like it's emphasizing this point, basically living off of stored body fat, I think is fantastic for metabolic flexibility, as opposed to so many people who are tied to food and glucose dependent and have to eat every few hours and are not good at living off stored body fat. So I think anything that is making you better at living off of stored body fat is advantageous. And that's why I like intermittent fasting, and I like exercising in a fasted state. And I do like this long period of time every day where you're not eating and you're living off of stored body fat the way we're designed to function the majority of the time. And so anything that looks like eating less frequently and running your whole metabolism off of stored fat, I really like. But I haven't seen enough data to make me want to go days and days without eating. I just haven't really seen it.
And you're probably not that keen to experiment either.
No, I mean, I've gone, 48 hours. I routinely go 24 hours, but I haven't really signed up for the week long not eating thing. Okay. I just haven't seen the data.
So you will go sometimes the occasional day without eating then?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm a big fan of Brad Pilon, the Eat Stop Eat guy. He basically just twice a week doesn't eat for 24 hours. And I've done that a number of times, and that's really not that bad. It's actually not much. I'm just a stone's throw away from that a lot of days. So it's really not that big a deal. I just don't really like going much longer than that.
Any reason for doing that? Like you mentioned before, you don't really see the evidence for extending fasting, but is it more of I know you're a busy guy, so is it more of a convenience thing for you a lot of the time, or?
It's usually logistical. Typically when I'm doing that, it's logistics.
Yeah, cool. No, that's interesting. Yeah, talking about working out fasted, I love training fasted, it's such a weird thing. Like, I get some people can't do it and they're like, how can you train fasted? And I don't know, it just feels like there's nothing in the way is how I think about it. It just feels like that the stimulus, the body's okay. The stimulus is going to hit the muscle. Because I fast afterwards a little bit too occasionally, and we can talk about that. And I always feel like there's processes happening that I don't want to just eat a ton of food that can get in the way of some of those processes. That's my super high level layman way of looking at it. So actually, it's good, I guess, to talk about that now since you brought that up. Do you feel like, I know we've talked before about how you divorce your eating and your training schedule are completely divorced from one another. We know from some of the most recent literature that the anabolic, the window of which you need to refeed following training is much larger than we realize anyway. So do you think there's any downside to, an extended period following training without eating? Like maybe a few hours, maybe longer.
I think there could be a downside if you were, more than 24 hours or so. I think there would definitely be some sort of downside. But, within like the context of a day, I really don't.
I remember when I was talking to Rob Morton, who's a PhD candidate at McMaster, does a lot of research on protein and muscle and training, and chatting to him at the conference, the resistance exercise conference, and I was sitting there going, I like fasting, Rob. Are you telling me I can't train fasted anymore? And he was like, I'm sorry, it's just, I don't believe that's optimal. I was like, I just kept trying to get him to agree with me,
right?
Which is not very productive, but that was my cognitive bias. Okay, cool. So another thing I want to ask you on this fasting topic, and this is again really kind of splitting hairs, I suppose. But I remember hearing one quite well-known expert talk about how she won't even have coffee when she fasts because technically that's not fasting because it kickstarts digestive systems or something like that. I know you're a massive coffee fan. You drink a lot of coffee. So do you think that's really that important? What do you think about that? Do you think coffee is going to interfere with the benefits from fasting?
Well, okay, I love Rhonda Patrick, and anything she says is probably right. I like her a lot. I'm just so addicted to coffee that I'm willing to ignore any information she has on that topic. Well, you have to think about the fact that the dose makes the poison on everything, right? So coffee is 99.999% water. So the actual mass of anything you're ingesting there is so small that it really can't be a huge, on one hand, you would have eating, 10 pounds of Oreos. And then on the other hand, you'd have drinking coffee that's 99.999% water. And the actual mass of anything you're ingesting is so small that it can't be that big a deal. So I have managed to justify my coffee addiction to the point where I can drink coffee every morning.
That's so funny that you mentioned her name. I was trying to be respectful, and you just said, Rhonda Patrick.
Yeah.
No, I'm a big fan too. She just makes my head spin because she's so intelligent.
Right.
And yeah, that's hilarious that you knew exactly what I was talking about because I don't think I mentioned that before the show or anything. So
no.
Clearly we just consume a lot of the same information. Okay, cool. So I guess, yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about diet in terms of the carnivore side of things. I don't know whether you were misquoted or I don't know whether this is taken out of context, but I saw, some information where you may be having some thoughts that, carnivore approach or, complete zero carb may have some downsides in the long term. Do you want to just elaborate on that and maybe clear the air? I just wondered I don't know whether that quote was taken out of context or not. So what's your current take on people that are like, proper zero carb, 100% carnivore?
Right. Okay, well, now, first of all, I think we all know that Sean Baker could kill me with his bare hands. So we got to factor that in. Don't get me wrong. I love the carnivores. I'm highly carnivorous myself. My diet has got to be 70% carnivore. And I'm so much happier with every aspect of my health now than I was when I was vegetarian. And I see so many patients who are strict vegans or vegetarians, and their health is just horrifically bad. Like, I feel so strongly about that I love the carnivores. I feel like they're balancing out the universe, the yin yang of the plant people. The universe needs the carnivores just to balance out the plant people. So thank God for the carnivores. And honestly, for your average person who goes on more of a carnivorous diet, they're probably going to get a health upgrade from a lot of perspectives. And so I don't want to say anything too bad about them. I also want to say I had a lot of people come and see me as a physician, right, who had signed up for the Carnivore Challenge, and they were doing labs before, during, and after, and they were doing a lot of body composition measurements and subjective scoring. And honestly, everyone did really, really well. Most people who adopt this diet feel better, look better, perform better. Their labs are awesome. It's typically great. I typically don't see glucose and A1C going up. I see it going down in most of these carnivore people, which is why I was so confused by Dr. Baker's glucose results anyway. And so it's just only lately now, after about 9 months of carnivore, I've had a few patients who just weren't feeling good and maybe had low folate levels or something like that. And I just feel like maybe for a few people, this is not optimal. And it makes me a little nervous, if you feel like crap and your folate level is a 1, and I just don't know if I can recommend this for the whole population. I mean, we prenatal vitamins, the whole reason we give out prenatal vitamins is to provide enough folic acid to pregnant women to prevent neural tube defects, right? I mean, this is like a big deal. There's a lot of science there. This is and so I don't know, is it really the best idea ever for someone to eat this way, forever? I just don't think we have the evidence to support that. I think that, the bottom line is, just because you eat only animals does not make you a carnivore. It's the same way that just because you eat only plants, it does not make you biologically an herbivore. I mean, humans are omnivores. There's no way around it. You just really can't. No one can debate that at all. And literally every human has eaten some plant foods, so I just don't know that it's, I feel like anytime you religiously go all plant or all animal, you've pretty much jumped the shark. It shouldn't be that. That's a false dichotomy. It shouldn't be that polarized. So I don't know, but I love my carnivore people. Please don't send me death threats. And I'm a little afraid Sean's going to try to kill me, but so I like the general concept of carnivory, and I'm still doing that myself. But I don't know if I'm going to be telling people to never eat a plant ever again.
That's great. And bunch of questions. Firstly, I just want to say I really respect how you change your mind based on new evidence and new data. I've known you for quite a while now, and I've seen your opinions and kind of evolve, it would seem, over the months and I suppose years now, or about a year. I suppose we spoke first, and that's really nice to see, and that's why I like following you, because I know that you try to be as objective as possible with your review of all of this stuff, and it makes it really helpful for people like me and my listeners and your followers. So that's really cool to see. Okay, that's interesting. So can you just elaborate on that? So if that is the case, if there are some people where pure carnivore is not optimal, then what should most of us be doing in order to, I know you kind of hinted it already, in order to actually mitigate against any issues implementing this kind of dietary approach?
Well, I feel very, very strongly that every mammal on Earth has a specific diet that is, probably, every mammal on Earth at least has a diet that it's used to being adapted to. And I think for Homo sapiens, it's basically meat, eating other animals pretty much in their entirety, and then eating things like low sugar fruit and tubers and nuts and berries and this sort of thing. And yes, it's true that if you look at hunter-gatherer populations, when you don't have cultivated plants, when you have wild, uncultivated plants, the carb and fat yield from these plants is way lower than we have in today's society. So you basically want to eat plants that are a lot lower in carb and fat yield. I'm talking about low sugar fruit and that sort of thing. And as long as you're careful about the protein to energy ratio and you're trying to keep it higher the way perhaps a hunter-gatherer would, then I think it's fine to eat those plant foods. You know what I mean? If we dumped you off in the wilderness with nothing but a spear, you would not get a lot of carbohydrates from wild uncultivated plant foods. But I do think that you would, be eating animals in their entirety, and you'd be eating some plant foods, and it would just be a higher protein to energy ratio, generally speaking, and you'd probably be in great health. It's the problem, the confusing part, the reason all this is, why this diet stuff is so hard? It's because humans are the ultimate survival machine. And we can adapt to frickin' anything. That is our superpower. Human superpower is that we can adapt to literally anything. We can live in any environment. We can eat any food. I mean, look at our kids. We're feeding them like juice boxes and goldfish crackers and abject garbage, but they're making it work. Their body is like, okay, this is what I'm getting now. All right, well, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and get to work and build what I have to build. You've got vegans, and your body's like, whoa, what? Now I'm getting like soy, and okay, well, I'm gonna make it work. So you can adapt to anything and sort of make it work, and that makes it really, really hard to figure out what's optimal, because so many things are possible. It's hard to find what's optimal, because you can live on just, Mountain Dew and cigarettes. I mean, that could be your whole diet. You know what I'm saying? And your body will eventually have some problems, but you can make anything work, sort of, and it just makes it so hard.
So just to clarify then, you're big on steak and eggs. Will you, but you'll throw in low sugar fruit and some green vegetables, as well, in order to, I guess, mitigate in any kind of like deficiencies in the diet. Is that fair to say?
Correct. So I'll eat low sugar fruit, and a low sugar fruit is like cucumber, tomato, pepper, avocado, olives, squash, zucchini, pumpkin, eggplant. These are all, botanically a low sugar fruit. I do eat a lot of those. I eat a lot of green vegetables where you're eating kind of the whole vegetable, like an asparagus or that sort of thing. And I will eat small tubers. I think the sweet spot with tubers is eating like literally a small tuber. So if you're eating like an uncultivated tuber, you're getting a lot of cell wall membranes and a lot of minerals and a lot of protein, but you're not getting this overwhelming amount of energy versus going out and getting a cultivated potato the size of your head, where the glycemic load is just ridiculous and the protein to energy ratio nosedives, right? So I'm not eating, grocery store fruit and cultivated potatoes the size of my head, which is the number one vegetable in America. And of course, we're not doing very well. So I will eat these small tubers and these low sugar fruits and these green vegetables, plants in their entirety. And then basically properly raised animals, nose to tail. And that's my template. It's properly raised animals. It's low sugar fruit. It's, any kind of green vegetable where you're eating the whole plant more or less, or some mushrooms or seaweed or that kind of thing. And then these small tubers.
Awesome. I love that template. Ted, I know you got to shoot off soon. One final question, and I'll grab your details for the listeners. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Now, this is a question that is quite close to my heart, really, because, I've got, people in my family and friends who are very overweight, and you'd be surprised, because, obviously I'm like the diametric opposite in a lot of ways. And you see case studies of people that were very obese and just dropped tremendous amount of weight, like hundreds of pounds in some cases. You've helped obviously tons of patients in this regard, and I'm guessing you've probably got a few case studies of people who have dropped tremendous amounts of weight over your long career. I would be absolutely fascinated to hear. I mean, I asked you on Twitter, like, you know, what's your like most simple heuristic for like fat loss? But more important than that, what have you seen as being like the best way that why is it that some people that are so obese are able to do this, they're able to make this change? You know, what is it? What's motivating them? Is it that they've got the right diet template? Is it attitude, motivation? What is it in your experience?
Wow. Okay. So honestly, I am all in on this protein to carbohydrate ratio. You know what I'm saying? So I have this meta-analysis of 155 ad lib diet studies where if you compile all the studies where humans ate ad lib amounts of food and someone tracked their macros, basically you eat as much as you want and someone's tracking your macros, you get the absolute lowest energy intake with the highest protein you can get and the lowest carbs you can get. So like, you know, if you're eating 50% protein and 10% carbs, your ad lib energy intake is going to be way lower, like an order of magnitude lower than if you're eating the exact opposite of 10% protein and 50% carbs. You know what I'm saying? So protein to carbohydrate ratio drives ad lib eating. And this is probably a seasonal thing for humans because we only get carbohydrates in the summertime and we tend to want to eat more and store up fat for the wintertime. And then in the winter, we don't really get carbohydrates. So, and animals are a lot leaner in the winter time. So you have this very low, this very high protein to energy ratio. The flip side to that is, obesogenic rat chow. You can literally buy obesogenic rodent chow that's guaranteed to make rodents fat and diabetic, right? You can guarantee fatty liver, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, and vascular disease in rodents by feeding them this stuff, which is always high fat and high carb together with protein held very low. So you have to over consume it just to stay alive and hit your protein satiety. So you can literally drive obesity by dropping this protein to carbohydrate ratio really low. And you can literally make any animal thinner by upping the protein to carbohydrate ratio. And we see evidence of this everywhere. Okay, the National Weight Control Registry, right? There's this thing in the U.S. It's called the National Weight Control Registry. And if you lose 30 pounds and keep it off for a year, you can be entered into this registry. So it's basically a successful weight loss registry. And there are people in there doing high carb, low carb, high calories, low calories, lots of exercise, no exercise. Everybody's all over the board on carbs, fats, calories, and exercise. What is the one thing that all these people have in common? Across the board, the whole group has protein up at like 18 to 19%, when the world average is 14 to 15%. And in the US, we're at about 12.5%. So what these people have done is manage to drag their protein percent up permanently to the kind of lower levels of hunter-gatherer protein percent. And as a result, they've lost weight and kept it off. There are also, we have a great meta-analysis on fat loss maintenance, like looking at what factors help people with long-term fat loss maintenance. And the most important factor you can measure is protein percent. If you can get your protein percent up by 5%, you're going to have triple the fat loss at the end of any time period that you would measure. A year later, you're going to have triple the fat loss. You're going to have lower insulin, lower triglycerides, and triple the fat loss if you can get your protein percent up 5% and keep it there. And so my best single piece of advice to every single person out there is to get your protein to carbohydrate ratio as high as you can. That's the very, very, very simple, ultra dumbed down heuristic, and this works really well. And I've got tons of patients who've lost, 50 pounds, 100 pounds, 150 pounds. And honestly, my opinion, the secret to long-term meaningful fat loss is to get your protein to carbohydrate ratio higher, so your ad lib energy intake is as low as possible. And then you have to figure out how to keep it there.
And just for that, I guess to simplify it further, ad lib meaning eat as much as desired, basically,
right.
Is the translation of that, right? So no, that's really awesome. And so you've had, like you say, you've had a lot of patients that have obviously succeeded doing that. What about is there anything more to it than that? Like when you sat down with those people prior to them having those amazing results, was there anything else you said or noticed, common themes among those that had the most success?
Yeah, I think the people who have the most success just really figure out how to make it a way of life. So they're somehow they get to the point where they're like, this is just what I do. You know what I mean? A meal to them is lean protein and some green veggies, and that's just how they are. That's just who they are. That's just how they eat. They've made it a habit. They've made it part of them. They've internalized it. And if you can figure out how to do that, and just be like, okay, now I'm the person who eats lean protein as the focus of every meal. If you can just figure out how to automate that and put that on autopilot and make it a habit, then you're home free. It's really, I think it's hard to do. But I think that's the crucial part, just figuring out how to make it part of who you are and just automatic.
Do you find that like to me, it sounds like, I don't know, to me, it kind of sounds like, it's easy to do, right? But then again, I've never been that person. I've never been tremendously obese. I've been, I've been probably 20% body fat when I was younger. But, that's like nothing compared to obviously a lot of people. So surely there's, in a lot of cases, a lot of issues with psychological issues, emotional, but maybe that's outside your realm. Like, do you find that is also part of the challenge with some of your patients?
Yeah, a lot of it is actually addiction, to be honest. So I do a lot of addiction medicine. I have a buprenorphine or a Suboxone license. I treat opioid addiction. I have a lot of patients who are heroin addicts or opioid addicts. And so a lot of the time I will see people exhibit the same kind of behavior with, refined carbohydrates. They know they shouldn't eat a whole cake, you know what I mean? But it's just like, I do think it lights up some dopamine in your brain. And some people really have a hard time not doing that. And then what you've got to do is just try to hit all your protein and mineral needs up front so you're less hungry, and then find something else in your life that gives you some dopamine, like exercise or a cool hobby or something like that. So you try to give your body what it needs on the protein and mineral side up front, and so you're less hungry, and then try to get your dopamine from something cool, like a cool hobby or a sport or exercise or something like that.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, just one last thing. It's so funny. Like I still, even though I've listened to so many of your podcasts and had you on mine, I still really struggle to reconcile the whole calories in, calories out versus macros. And I listened to our part 2 yesterday, and I just had an epiphany. I was like, oh yeah, you can overeat protein and not get fat. Therefore, calories in, calories out is kind of debunked.
Right.
And it was such a light bulb moment for me. And I know you said it to me multiple times, but for some reason it takes a certain number of repetitions to get it through my head. I appreciate you keeping me, educating me on that stuff. Ted, really enjoyed this conversation. It was a little bit more rapid fire this time because I just have so many things I wanted to ask you, and you answered them so well. What is the best way for the listeners to find out more about you?
Oh, well, yeah. I'm mostly on Twitter, and you can check out my website at Burn Fat Not Sugar. Yeah.
I'm guessing on the website, like you say, you've democratized a lot of stuff we've spoken about. You've simplified it right down. Here's what you eat and here's how you exercise. Get on with it. At the end of the day.
I've tried. It could be even better. yeah, I need to spend some more time making it even simpler and dumbing it down even more. But that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Well, for everyone listening, I highly, highly recommend you follow Ted on Twitter. It's the best Twitter account for fat loss and muscle gain, in my opinion, because you just create these great. Everyone thinks you're like an infographic genius. These amazing things you post on your Twitter, but like I remember you telling me, like, yeah, no, I'm not actually that talented. I just have some like fancy app that automates sales.
Pretty much.
But I love that. Cool, Ted. Thank you so much. And for everyone listening, if you want to get the show notes for this episode, obviously everything that Ted and I mentioned, please go to the blog post, which will be on corporatewarrior.co/TED-free, because I'm not sure if I've already done /TED. So corporatewarrior.co/TED-free. And for all of the podcasts, please go to corporatewarrior.co/podcast. And until next time, guys, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Before you head off, head on over to corporatewarrior.co/ebook to get your free high-intensity training Google Sheet to track your training progress. And get my ebook with 20 interview transcripts with some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill Day Simone on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. Head on over to corporatewarrior.co/ebook now and enter your email address for instant access. This episode is brought to you by MedX Precision Fitness in Toronto, Canada, a leading-edge fitness facility co-founded by my friend Blair Wilson, who has featured on the podcast numerous times. MedX Precision Fitness are highly respected in the strength training industry, and with the help of a wonderful team, have grown a very popular and successful training facility. They've been featured in the Huffington Post, the Globe and Mail, Toronto Guardian, and many more. They provide complete fitness in as little as 20 minutes per week and use evidence-based, high-effort strength training to give you the most efficient and effective workout you'll ever have. As many of you long-time listeners will know, this is the perfect workout for the busy executive. Aside from Blair's bulging muscles, there are no distractions, so no mirrors, no loud music, and no meatheads walking around everywhere. MedX Precision Fitness uses some of the most sophisticated and high-quality equipment available in the way of the MedX machine line, delivering you the best results possible. As well as personal training, they offer nutrition coaching and bod pod services to optimize your health, muscle gain, and fat loss, and give you instant feedback on your progress. Book a free consultation now by going over to medxpf.com. That's medxpf.com, medxpapafoxtrot.com, and book your free consultation now.